I'm Stephanie, and welcome to Books and Bubbly. This is a playlist where I drink something bubbly while talking about a book that I get all bubbly about. And today I'm going to be talking about One of Us Knows by Alyssa Cole. So I do want to give a warning, there are going to be spoilers in this review. If you do want a spoiler-free version of this review, which you should check out, and you should definitely read this book before coming back to this review, please check out my What I Read in February video. This is a book you do not want to go in knowing spoilers, because this was so good. But let's go ahead and see what it promised first. Years after a breakdown and a diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder derailed her historical preservationist career, Kenetria Nash and her alters have all been given a second chance they can't refuse, a position as resident caretaker of a historic home. Having been dormant for years, Ken has no idea what led them to this isolated Hudson River island, but she's determined not to ruin their opportunity. Then, a surprise visit from the home's conservation trust, just as a nor'easter bears down on the island, disrupts her newfound life, leaving Ken trapped with a group of possibly dangerous strangers, including the man who brought her life tumbling down years earlier. When he turns up dead, Ken is the prime suspect. Caught in a web of secrets and in a race against time, Ken and her alters must band together to prove their innocence and discover the truth of Kavanaugh Island and their own past, or they risk losing not only their future, but their life. So this was such an interesting read. I thought it covered some really great themes on racism, classism, mental health, and just the general what the fuckery of rich white men who like to punch down instead of entering a fight with someone of their own size. I've never read a book that had DID, or again, dissociative identity disorder, as a main component without it being used as like a twist or a way to explain like bad behaviors away. I really liked that it was just, this is her mental health state, this is her experience. Now, I can't speak to how accurate the representation is, but she did acknowledge working with the DID accuracy consultant, so I am going to say that it passed the vibe check on some sort of scale and by some expert. But as far as I know, this isn't an Own Voices book, and I am not in the DID community, so take my review with a grain of salt on the rep here, but I thought it was very interesting. I do think Cole did a really good job of bringing me into the inner world and showing how Ken's system, as she calls it, worked and how each identity or headmate was very distinct and easy to understand. Basically, within Ken's head, she has this castle. I'm gonna guess it kind of looks similar to the one that's on the cover. And that's where her headmates or alters spend their time. They are fully formed people who just happen to share Ken's body. So we do have Ken, who is essentially like the body and the main personality. Then we have Della, who is a 65-year-old, extremely type A member, who's basically the one who just gets stuff done. We have Solomon, who is a 30-year-old male who rides shotgun a lot of the time and is a voice that Ken hears very frequently and basically has a dialogue going with. We also have Empress, who is a she-they teenager and is very obsessed with like anime and basically just being a sullen teenager. There's Mesmer, who is a 20-year-old female that helps Ken regulate her emotions and basically keeps Ken and all the other alters in check. We have Kiki, who is a 4-year-old girl who is just obsessed with animals and cute things. There's Lurk, who is true to his name, and he kind of just like lurks in the background. And then there is Rapunzel, who we don't see much of, but they've locked themselves inside the tower of the castle and basically just scream a lot. Rapunzel has the unfortunate role of being the trauma holder and is basically kept hidden from the other members of Ken's system. They've taken on this role of keeping all the pain and whatever it is that triggered essentially her diagnosis into coming. They keep all of it so that the other alters and Ken can continue to live their lives. And I will say it was a little tricky at first reading about the alters switching in and out of like hosting or fronting, as they call it. The story starts off with Ken waking up, and she has been dormant for 6 years. She's not been conscious or aware of what is happening to her body or her alters for those 6 years. She doesn't know where she is. She doesn't really remember being dormant either. And now she's just standing on this dock and trying to figure out what has happened between the last time she had control and now as this boat is just chugging towards her. Solomon is the one who starts to help her fill in the gaps, especially all the things around the pandemic as this does take place in 2022. I saw a lot of reviews that said they didn't love the mentions of like COVID and the pandemic, so if that's something you don't really like in your fiction, you might not like this. To me, it didn't really bother me. It was just kind of interesting seeing someone who completely missed it all to be caught up and be like, so wait, why are we wearing masks in public? Wait, why do I have to stay? Oh, okay, interesting. Oh, this is why I've lost a lot of weight and have nothing? Okay. Because while Ken was dormant, Della was basically in charge, and Della did not handle the pandemic very well. Like, Ken realizes she is much thinner than she should be, she feels a lot weaker, and has found out that she has pretty much lost everything. So Della got them this job that they're heading off to, and that's why this boat is coming towards her, because it's on an island. So she finds out that this job is as a caretaker of a historic property, but both Ken and her alters have a severe reaction when like the boat comes around this corner and they see the property on this island as it is the exact same castle that is inside Ken's mind where her alters live. She doesn't recognize it in real life as a place that she's been to before, but she must have to have recreated it within herself. She feels this like deep sense of dread and foreboding, and her alters are also not very pleased with this development. Worse, Della isn't answering Ken. Ken, while she is fronting, she can have conversations with the other alters that are in her mind. But Della's not responding. Della's not answering anything. And Solomon's trying to figure out like why Della's being quiet, why she's not saying anything. He doesn't really fully know because he does like to interact with Ken a lot more. So Solomon's going to try to figure out what's going on within the system, and Ken is going to have to take charge in figuring out why this place is familiar and why her body seems to know something that no one in her mind knows, except for maybe Rapunzel, because again, Rapunzel has locked themselves away. Ken knows that she has no choice but to do the job, and when she arrives on the island, she meets this woman, Celeste, who is the groundskeeper. And Celeste starts to clue Ken into the history of the castle, which is also known as Grace Castle, as it's named after Grace Kavanaugh, who designed it. Because again, they're going to Kavanaugh Island. Her husband, Simon Kavanaugh, was a real piece of work, but he was rich and indulged his wife in letting her bring her dream home to life. Basically, we end up finding out he let her do this so he could sequester her away, as it kind of sounds like at the time, I think this is supposed to take place, or Grace's portion is supposed to take place in like the 1920s, 1930s maybe. And we essentially find out that Grace is either bi or she is a straight up lesbian, but obviously cannot be that way at that time. So Ken gets a lot more interested in the history as she learns that Grace was black and Simon was white, which again, kind of uncommon for the time for them to be married when the house was built. And I should also note that Ken is also black. She becomes very interested in learning more about Grace's life and how this home of hers has any ties to Ken herself. Celeste basically warns Ken not to explore the castle or the main house at night, as it is haunted, and that she should stay in her caretaker's cottage. Now, this is a point that I both liked and disliked about this book. Ken pulls a final girl in a horror movie card and ignores Celeste's advice and heads right on into the home at night and does indeed see what appears to be a ghost. But also not really. So later we do find out that there is another alter hiding inside Ken's mind. But this is also the alter that Ken sees as a ghost running around the house, who does tie into Grace Kavanaugh as she was her lover. I wasn't sure if it was some mental projection, or again if the wall between reality and her mind was kind of breaking down, so she was able to see this alter outside of it. But I also don't think it fully got explained, or if it did, I am missing that. It was like, did she actually see anything? Was it just a memory? Again, I'm not really sure. And it could have been explained, and maybe I'm just somehow missing it from my review. That could be totally plausible. I don't remember it being explained, but again, it could have been. So she's in this haunted house, and then her altars start to go missing. So Kiki, Solomon, and Empress are investigating what's happening to the others. They also start to notice that their inner world is changing. So they live in this castle, but there's nothing outside the castle in their mind. It is just black. It is blank. Like, there is nothing. They only exist within the castle. But the longer Ken stays at the castle in the real world, the more things start showing up outside of the castle within. And I thought this was such a cool element. It's very much like Inception meets Pleasantville, where they're in like the shared smaller world and things are starting to show up in color and change and not be exactly what they should be. But we don't know if this change is good or what it means. I thought it was a really unique way to add another layer or a different view of like the main mystery, as both of these worlds are starting to come more into focus and we're starting to understand what this place could mean. So out in the real world, Ken is trying to befriend Celeste when her world is rocked yet again and her ex-boyfriend Landon shows up to the property. So his family is on the board of the Preservation Society, and she and Landon have some unpleasant history. Years ago, she attacked his father, and he does know about her DID. So he's there with his dad and some others for a party at the estate. This is another area that the book did kind of lose me a little bit, as it basically turns out to be like rich white men doing some fucked up shit, as they hired Ken and Celeste to be on the island so they could be hunted, supposedly as a game. But not really. Like, these hunters are taking this very seriously. Like, the ultimate prey, I guess. Now, I will say, this part was written so well. It's so tense. I mean, honestly, this whole book, I think, was written really well. I didn't know what was going to happen, but it also kind of felt a little bit like it was stepping into over-the-top territory. It does end up tying into why Ken knows this place, as she was brought there when she was a child and under the care of like a foster parent who apparently hates children, and brought Ken along for these games, as these games have gone on for years. These women dress up in like white and they run off and hide in the woods, and the men are supposed to hunt them down and then engage in some activities. But why would you take a child to this? Like, ugh, what is wrong with that person? So something obviously terrible happened here when Ken was young, and essentially kind of leans into what triggered her DID or played a big role in her diagnosis. And then we do find out why like the Grace storyline ties in. Not that they have like shared history, they're not family or anything, but when Ken was there as a child, I believe it was Grace's like lover, who was a woman, was also there and basically told Ken to like go hide, tried to save her. So that is why this other altar shows up at the house, because that's who she saw at the house who helped protect her. So even with some of the stuff that I felt didn't get resolved or were kind of skewing off into implausibility territory, I still absolutely loved this. I ignored everything else so I could keep reading this book. Like, truly, having the altars give their points of view was such a unique way of showing different perspectives, but without having basically like too many bodies to keep track of. And it was interesting because they could all communicate within her head. I did find it interesting that Ken knows what her inner world looks like, but she herself cannot get inside. Not until the end, when Rapunzel finally comes out of the tower, as they are, facing this trauma that Ken went through when she was a child. So her system is kind of evolving. They're kind of changing. Her altars are taking on different roles of handling the trauma and figuring out, okay, what do we do now? And Rapunzel themselves also kind of assembles with the other members of Ken's system. Honestly, this was just such a vibe, as the kids say. I thought this was like kind of creepy at times, and the pace in this was absolute perfection. I found the tone really well done, and it had a very strong undercurrent of like gothic horror in some aspects that I really did like. It does have a lot of themes and messages that it's trying to convey, but I thought it handled them all pretty well and gave enough time for each of these themes to breathe and actually mean something. It wasn't just paying lip service to like mental health or classism, racism. Like, it actually took the time to delve into those, and it had something to say about them. Honestly, I thought this was a captivating read and really unlike anything I've read before. Again, I loved that the DID was not just like a, oh, tee-hee, she's crazy. Like, no, it was actually a part of her experience. It played a major role in the book without making it feel forced or kind of like a spectacle, which I really did appreciate. I also really liked that it kind of felt very much like a found family type story, but the family already lives together inside Ken's head. I truly could not put this down. Now, it does say it's a thriller. I wouldn't say it really had thriller vibes until the end when we get to like the people hunting portion, but I absolutely loved the mystery and the suspense of it all. Now, I do want to share the content warnings that the book does list on the first page, just in case those are topics that you don't want to or that you can't read. So that includes depictions of physical violence, references to self-harm, misogyny, ableism, racism, and SA. So if those are triggers for you, this might not be the best read. If those are not triggers for you, I highly recommend this book because I do think it is fantastic. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars, and I truly can't wait to try something else by Cole in the future. If you've read any of her other work and have some recommendations of what I should start with, please share those in the comments below. Or if you have read other books similar to this, I would love to hear about those too. Otherwise, thanks for joining me for Books and Bubbly.